If you live to serve and want to make an even bigger difference, consider joining the U.S. Army. With training in fields like medical care, linguistics, and engineering, an Army career can amplify your efforts with humanitarian opportunities all over the world. Plus, you'll receive competitive pay and incredible benefits, so you'll be taken care of, too. Learn more at GoArmy.com.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
The United States Coast Guard. We're always ready for the call. We place our trust in thee. Through surf and storm and howling gale, high shall our
Good morning and welcome to America's Web Radio and David's Pick on America's Web Radio. We've got a very special guest today, and even though one person doesn't like the fact that I tell family stories, but I will in this case because it's sort of interesting. Never happened before, so we're going to go into that. We started out with a Jody, and we have Colonel Ron Mastig on, and Colonel retired. And Ron, we do something. We started this about a month and a half ago because a friend of mine that's a vet was going into surgery because of his service in Vietnam and being sprayed by Agent Orange. And we just take a few seconds for everyone that's listening to just remember all of our veterans that have served and served our country so well to keep us free. So we'll just have one moment of silence, and then I'll be right back to you and welcome you to America's Web Radio. And thank you. So with that, Ron, I wanted to get into the first thing. This has never happened, and I've had the station going now for 15 years, and this has never happened that we have a vet that trained in my hometown of Lubbock at Reese Air Force Base, which is now, it's been converted into a general aviation base with shopping and all of this other kind of stuff out there. And that's one part of it. And then the other thing is that my son that's in the Air Force, that's a major in the Air Force, is serving now at Shaw, and so did you. So we've got two things in common. Welcome to America's Web Radio, Ron.
Thanks, David. Good morning.
Good morning to you, and I hope wherever you are, it's a pleasant day, and fall is right around the corner, but that's the way it is. Tell me, I want to go into your service, and then part of the reason that you're on, and we talked briefly about it, was that, and I got to see you in November, or what was it, September the 19th, I guess it was, that you were at a meeting of POWs and MIAs that you spoke, and this was with in accordance with our part of Johns Creek, and I want to tip my hat to two people, Mike Mazzell, that is the president of Johns Creek Vietnam Veterans Association, and then also Rick White, who is the director of the Georgia Military Veterans Institute. Both guys are just absolutely fantastic gentlemen, and I remember you talking about your experience in the not-so-loved Hanoi Hilton. So with that, just tell us a little bit about your background, but I've already busted the bubble about where you took your first bit of training, Reese Air Force Base. So go on from there.
Well, let me start a little bit before that. I am a very proud Kansan. I grew up in a little town in north central Kansas and went to the University of Kansas. So during football season, I don't talk too much about college sports, except I am kind of a Kansas State fan during football season. But when basketball season rolls around, I'm a big Jayhawk fan. So we'll get that out of the way right now. I'm a loyal Kansan, even though I've lived down here in Georgia for 40 years.
Well, another thing we have in common, Kansas is in the Big 12, and so is Texas Tech, my alma mater.
Yes, they are. That's in fact, last basketball season, that was Texas Tech had a good team in the last 2 years, and the last game they played down there, KU had to win it, and they did. So I was looking forward to this season coming up. Looks like Baylor's going to be the team to beat in the Big 12 this year, but you just never know. So I'm looking forward to that.
Well, again,
I took
welcome.
ROTC, Air Force ROTC at the University of Kansas, and went into the Air Force in November of 1963. In fact, you and I were talking before. I arrived at Reese Air Force Base on a Monday before the Friday where President Kennedy was assassinated. My wife and I spent about a year there in Lubbock at Reese Air Force Base, and from there I got an assignment as a backseat pilot in an RF-4C, which is a photo reconnaissance Phantom, and went to Shaw Air Force Base for training in the RF-4C. Then we went to Alconbury, England. I spent a little over a year and a half in Alconbury, England, flying RF-4Cs, and my son, Michael Marvin Mastin, was born while we were at Alconbury, England. Came back to the States in October of '66 and proceeded to go on over to Udorn Air Force Base in Thailand. Talk about some odd things happening. I've got to bring this up. When we launched our airplanes out of Mountain Home, Idaho, to fly to Udorn, Thailand, the crew chief that launched me was a kid 2 years younger than I was from Beloit, Kansas. And again, Beloit, Kansas is a town about 4,000 or 5,000 people, so you knew just about everybody in town. Got to Udorn and in Thailand, and one of the first things we did was go to a jungle survival school at Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines. Well, flew to Clark, and the first day we were there, before we actually went out into the jungle, I was at the officers' club, and I saw this guy dive off the diving board, and I said, man, I recognize that guy. And sure enough, when he popped up, it was a fraternity brother of mine from the University of Kansas who was an Air Force flight surgeon. Went out into the field, and one of the first classes we had, they were feeding a live chicken to a big boa constrictor. And the airman who was feeding the boa constrictor this chicken was from Beloit, Kansas, who again was a couple of years behind me in high school. So then from there, I went out into the jungle for a couple of days and came back, and we were checking out to fly back to Udorn. And I walked down into the lobby of the hotel, and lo and behold, there was a Navy Lieutenant J.G. standing there from Beloit, Kansas. So in a matter of about 2 weeks, I had seen 4 people that I knew from Beloit, Kansas, halfway around the world.
Isn't that amazing? And you just never know, do you?
Boy, you don't. It's a small world. It certainly is. But we flew our photo reconnaissance mission out of Udorn into North Vietnam. I was actually shot down on my 34th mission, and it was the target was a dinky little bridge north of Hanoi. We were flying along on a Sunday afternoon. In fact, the day that we were flying our mission was the day of the first Super Bowl, Super Bowl I. And, of course, being from Kansas and the Chiefs were playing in it, it took me a couple of years before I found out who won the game. But anyway.
That's amazing.
We would fly half day and half night. And this particular time that we were in the daytime, and it was a nice, beautiful day. We were flying along north of Hanoi, about 1,000 feet above the ground, flying probably around 500 miles an hour, when we felt a thump in our airplane. We began losing fuel, losing hydraulic pressure. We started getting smoke in the cockpit, and before long we lost control of the airplane and had to punch out. So that was late in the afternoon. I saw a little village right below me. I could see the people congregating, and they were beating gongs, and looks like everyone was coming I was on the side of a hill. They were coming up to get me, but it got dark before they came up to me. So the next morning early, I was surrounded by Vietnamese peasants and captured and taken back down into the village, where I spent the rest of the day. Some militia showed up later in the day, and I was put in a jeep and made my trek to Hanoi, and my first introduction of the Hanoi Hilton, which is a French prison camp named Wallow that the French had built to house Vietnamese prisoners. But now we named it, well, I didn't name it. It was already named by the time I got there, but it was the Hanoi Hilton. So that's how I got there.
Well, was it ground fire or a missile that got?
It definitely was not a missile. It was ground fire of some sort, and I think it was probably a pretty small caliber, maybe no more than a 57 millimeter. It could even been a stray rifle bullet. I don't know, but it hit us at a critical part of the airplane, and we lost control. So
wow,
that was it.
And your front seat, what happened with him?
He got out. He punched out probably a few seconds after I did, which the speed of the airplane, though, he was out of view of where I was. And I was captured the next morning. He was far enough away from the village that they finally tracked him down with dogs almost a week later. He had hurt his back in the ejection, and consequently wasn't able to move a whole lot. So he hadn't gone too far from where he was actually shot down. They tracked him down. I did not see him. Excuse me. I talked to him once we were in our cells. One day I was able to talk to him under my door. He was in a cell across the corridor there. But then it was like a couple of years later before I actually got to talk to him again. And then finally, in 1970, I was able to move into a cell where he was also in there, so got a chance to see him. He's still alive. I think he just turned 89 years old. He lives out in Tucson. He lost his wife here about a year ago, but he's in good health, so I talk to him occasionally.
Oh, these stories are just absolutely incredible, and people that, I can't imagine what you went through, and I learned something every time I talk with a vet and a POW, and I learned something last night as we were talking, and you were in the Hanoi Hilton, but then they transferred you to another prison, and then back to the Hanoi Hilton, correct?
Yeah, they moved us around quite a bit, and we never could figure out if there was a rhyme or reason for it, or just they just wanted to move people. But yeah, I was originally in the Hilton. We had different parts of the Hilton. The Hilton is a whole block complex, and it's made up of different small prisons within that block, city block. So we had a name for all of them. One of the first things that we always did when we moved to a new camp was to try to come up with a name. And when I say that, all our conversation was covert. We were not allowed to talk to anyone outside of your own cell. Consequently, if you moved into a new camp, and the new camp might have 4 or 5 different buildings, and within 4 or 5 different buildings there are 4 or 5 different cell blocks, and so all the communications had to be done covertly. But somehow we managed to get everybody on board and come up with a name for our camp. So like I say, the Hilton was already named by the time I got there, and within the Hilton, some of the different prisons within the Hilton were named like the Desert Inn, the Mint, the Golden Nugget. They were all named from casinos from Las Vegas, because a lot of the early shoot downs were 105 pilots that had been at Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas, and consequently they were the first ones to get to name these things, and so these prison cells all had names from the Strip out in Las Vegas.
Well, now, how long did it, and was it active when you were there, the TAP code?
TAP code was already active when I was there, yes. Guy by the name of Smitty Harris, who was an Air Force 105 pilot, when he had been at survival school years before, they had an instructor that had talked about a tap code that had been used. I can't remember exactly by whom, but miners sometimes used it, and I think other prisoners years ago had used it to communicate. And what the tap code was, if you're unfamiliar with it, you took the alphabet and threw out the letter K. So you end up with 25 letters. And then you make a 5x5 matrix out of those 25 letters. Across the top row is A, B, C, D, E. Next to it, F, G, H, I, J. And then there's no K, so L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. And we would spell out every word, either by tapping on the wall or making a noise, or if they could see you, you could just make a movement or something. But you would first tell them which line you wanted, and then pause, and then which column you wanted on that line. So if you wanted to say hi, which was the second line, the second letter is an H, it would be tap, 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 and then the I would be tap, 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 tap. So you just spelled out hi. So that's how we communicated. And yeah, we named all the camps after that. So I left the Hilton and went to the zoo, another place called the Zoo, which was used to be an old movie studio that the French had years ago. I spent some time there, and then the big move came in May of 1968 when 55 of us left the Hanoi Hilton and moved to Son Tay, which was a town out west of Hanoi, and that camp we named Camp Hope. So we stayed there for a little over 2 years until July of 70, and then we moved not too far down the road from where Camp Hope was to another camp that we named Faith, Camp Faith. Well, we were there from July until November of 70, at which time the U.S. Special Forces raided the Son Tay camp, Camp Hope, the one that we had left. It happened at nighttime. We heard the jets fly over. We heard missiles being fired. We heard anti-aircraft guns going. We didn't know what happened, but the next morning the Vietnamese came around and told us to roll up all of our gear, which we had. Everybody had a rattan mat that they slept on, and then we had a few personal items like a blanket and some clothes and stuff. And you rolled everything up in your mat. We got on trucks and we went back to the Hanoi Hilton. Once we got to Hilton, we went to another place within the Hilton called Camp Unity, because now there were about five or six big rooms where all 55 of us from Camp Faith were put in one room. Well, that was like a kid coming downstairs and looking at the Christmas presents under a Christmas tree on Christmas morning, because here you walk into a room and there are 54 other guys there, where you may have not seen more than one or two people in the whole time you'd been there. So it was really a great time, and probably the best time we had. There was not enough time in the day to do the things that we wanted to do when we got in those big rooms. We were able to exercise somewhat. The room was like 60 by 80, and you either had a big platform built in the middle with a track around the outside of it, or you had a slab on the sides with a big open space in the middle, depending on which room you were in.
What about facilities?
We could run around the edges. We would do calisthenics if you were able to, physically able to. And then we had 2 meals a day. This is the first time we actually had what you might call a bathroom facility too. Up until that time, all we had were 3-gallon buckets for human waste, which you would use, and then the next day they'd take you out. You could empty your bucket. But now we actually had what we call 2-trackers, which a lot of people have seen throughout the world. That's just footprints where you squat down and there's a big hole behind you. And we had 2 of those besides our buckets. So that was quite an upgrade. But then we had during the day we'd had classes. We would teach classes. If you knew anything about anything, you would probably either give a lecture or teach a class about it. no one could dispute some of your facts because there was no way they could check on it. We had no books, no computer, no nothing. It was just general knowledge that you yourself knew. I actually gave a 1-hour lecture one night on Beloit, Kansas, and I had a what you might call a now I can't remember what I was going to say. Anyway, it was the audience was they were there. They couldn't one anything place they could go, so it was an interesting talk, at least by my standards. But we taught we had classes and we taught languages. We had we had a one guy that was very musically inclined that he put on a musical program one time where he would have maybe 10 or 12 people, and he would assign a note for each person, and he could point to them, and they could give them that note, and we could actually make a musical sound. I took Spanish. I had my Spanish instructor was a Naval Academy graduate who had majored in Spanish, and we got to where one day a week we would sit around for 2 hours, a group of about 12 of us, and speak Spanish. If we didn't know the Spanish word, we would make one up. We would take the English word or the French word and give it kind of a Spanish-sounding sound to it, and then we would use that. And we could converse with each other using those words. When I got back to the States and tried to use some of those words, I found out that they weren't even close to what the Spanish was. But anyway, we had a good time.
You know, I guess you really draw for straws, and when I say straws, you'll take anything to keep your mind occupied and try to forget the circumstance. The food, what were you said 2 meals a day?
Yeah, we had 2 meals a day, and for the most part, now it varied from 65 when 64 when Everett Alvarez was shot down, but 65 were the first time that they started having more than just one prisoner over there. The food wasn't very well. Everett Alvarez had some fairly good food to start with because they didn't know what to do with him or didn't know if there were going to be more or what to feed him. But then after that, the food was pretty sparse. That was 65. I was shot down in January of 67, and during the almost 2 years there, the guys had some pretty meager meals where they didn't get much and they were hungry all the time. By the time I got shot down, we didn't get enough food to keep us from being hungry, but it was food that if you were able to eat it all and you ate it all, for the majority of people, if you were in good health, you could pretty much maintain your health. We would have both times we would have either a big bowl of rice or a small loaf of French bread. Then we would have the main meal was either like some sort of soup. It was either you might have the worst one was what we called sewer green soup because it looked like they'd gone out and just pulled a bunch of weeds and put it in the water and boiled it and made a soup out of it. But we had pumpkin soup. Every once in a while, not very often, but you might have a potato soup. Very, very little meat ever showed up in it. And then you'd usually have, the soup was usually made out of the vegetable of the season. And however long the season lasted, that's how long you ate that particular soup. And then you'd have a side dish that was usually made out of the same stuff that the soup was made from. So a real treat was if you would get a soup and find a piece of pork fat floating in your soup. Now, I was never a fat eater at all. I would always cut the fat off of a pork chop and everything. I just didn't like fat. But if you found a piece of pork fat in your soup, it might be pretty small, maybe an inch long or something like that, but it probably still had the hide on it. It might even have some hair sticking out of it. But down at the bottom was a nice little piece of fat. Man, that was like finding a piece of Godiva chocolate or something. It was absolutely delicious. So that was the food we ate. We ate that twice a day. In the fall of 1969, after Ho Chi Minh died, the food did pick up a little bit. It got a little bit better. Therefore, there was a time where we would have a little bit more meat. We might have the two things I craved that I never could get over there were milk and peanut butter. And in 1969, there was a short period of time there where they gave us some condensed milk that we could put into our cup and mix with water twice a day at our meal. And they also had fried peanuts with a little green onions or something cooked in there. So after that, my craving was over, but I still wanted to drink some milk and eat some peanut butter. But and that was basically our meals, twice a day, and usually rice or bread and a soup and a side dish.
Were you able to get any care packages at all?
No, we got in the Christmas of 1969. I'd been there almost 3 years. Was the first time that I got a package from home. The packages were, by the time we got them, don't know how big they were when they were mailed originally by our families, but by the time we got them, it might just consist of maybe one or two articles. We never got any Red Cross packages or anything like that. It all came from family. And the whole time I was over there, a little over 6 years, I think I got maybe 5 or 6 packages. The best things you could get in a package was actually a photograph of your family, which occasionally I did. But that was it as far as packages from home.
Wow. And how long did it take your family to find out where you were and how to send a package?
Like I say, I was shot down in January of '67, and my family didn't know I was dead or alive until September of 1969. So it was coming up on 3 years before they knew I was dead or alive. And the way they found out that I was alive was there was a seaman apprentice, Doug Hegdahl, who had fallen off of a ship out in the Gulf of Tonkin. He'd gone up on the top side, whatever you call it, on a ship, and the ship had made a sudden turn, and he'd fallen over. They didn't know it immediately, so he tread water, I think, for something. He was in the water for about 5 hours before some Vietnamese fishermen picked him up and took him to Hanoi. When they got him, and Doug was a farm boy from South Dakota, and Doug, intentionally or unintentionally, the Vietnamese didn't think he was too smart just by the way he talked, so they kind of made a trustee out of him that since he didn't, they heard his story and they knew he wasn't flying airplanes or doing anything like that, so they allowed him to once in a while go around the camp and clean up a little bit. Well, in doing so, he was able to communicate with the other prisoners. He was able to accumulate a list of close to 300 names of people who were POWs at that time. And then the Vietnamese were wanting to release some people early. Well, according to the Code of Conduct, you do not accept early release. You go home in order of shoot down. The guys that have been there the longest are the ones that go home first. And so when they offered early release to Doug told him no, he wasn't going to because it wasn't his turn. Well, finally the senior ranking officers among the POWs gave Doug an order and told him, Doug, you need to go home. You shouldn't be here in the first place, and besides that, you've got a lot of information that you could give our government. So he finally, he didn't want to, but he finally accepted early release and came home, and he had my name on his list. So that's how my family finally found out that I was alive, is because he brought my name home and said, yes, he is a POW.
Wow. And, with your training, was there any way to anticipate what was ahead of you when you were taken to the Hilton the first time?
When I got out of pilot training and had orders to go to Alconbury, England, I had orders to go to survival school at Stead Air Force Base. Well, Alconbury came back and said, and they were the first ones to get the F-4 in all of USAFE, Air Force in Europe. And so I was due to be arrived there just about the same time that the very first airplanes were to arrive, and I was one of the first classes. I was the first class at Shaw Air Force Base that was going to Alconbury. Alconbury says, we don't have time to send him to survival school, so skip survival school, bring him, he's got to come over here. So I did. I went right from Reese to Shaw to Alconbury without going to Stead for survival school. Well, after a year and a half there, I got orders to go to Udorn, Thailand, Southeast Asia, and again, I had orders to go to survival school. And the same thing happened. Nope, don't have time to send him to survival school, so I went directly to Udorn, Thailand without going to survival school. So the only survival school I had been to was that jungle survival at Clark Air Force Base, and basically all that taught you what to do is to how to survive if you get shot down in the jungle. So no, there was no way I could anticipate what lied ahead of me when I got shot down. So the other guy said that survival school was exactly what they saw when they walked into that first room at Wallow. Was a solitary room, a concrete floor, a little stool sitting on the floor, a desk at the head of the room there was a solitary light bulb hanging from the ceiling. The desk had a blue tablecloth on it and a chair behind it. The Vietnamese interrogator would come in and sit down in his chair and stare down at you sitting on your little stool out in the middle of the room. And they said that's the survival school showed that to them, but unfortunately I hadn't had a chance to see that, so I wasn't too surprised.
Let me, the thing that we all went to, or the Johns Creek service that they did for POWs. A lot of the POWs talked about being in solitary. Did you ever serve time in solitary? And if so, what did you do to keep your head straight?
Yeah, I think everybody was in solitary for some time. I was in solitary for about 6 weeks before I ever had a cellmate, and then I was in solitary again after that for several months before I again had some cellmates. It kind of depended on a couple things. How many shoot downs there were at the same time you were captured, whether or not they had room to put people in solitary. I think, this is my own opinion, junior ranking officers sometimes got cellmates faster than senior ranking officers. Senior ranking officers, they tried to keep the pressure on and get something out of them. So when you're in solitary, you and again, I think I brought this up at Johns Creek. Of course, everybody listening wasn't there, but three of the first things that came to mind in retrospect when I found myself facing the interrogator for the very first time was I so much communications. I so much wanted to talk to somebody to find out what to expect, what was expected out of me, and how I should handle it. Another thing was setting some goals. I had to, set a goal for tomorrow. I couldn't live in the day right then when they were probably tying me up in ropes or something like that. I had to set a goal for tomorrow and the next day. And then probably one of the most important things was the strength of your own character, on how you had been raised, the people that had been around you as you were growing up, what kind of what they had instilled in you to allow you to put up with the pressures of that you were presently undergoing. So those things are always in your mind when you're in solitary, and it's the memories. You think a lot about things that have happened in the past. I mean, and usually the good things of your past are what you remember, and that's what you try to occupy your mind with. You also, like I say, set goals or think about things you can do in the future, trying not to spend too much time on allowing yourself to think about the situation you're actually in. You try to imagine what it'll be like in the future and try to remember what it was like in the past.
I want to take just a minute to remind everybody that we bring this show to you, and I want to thank the folks that have contributed to our veteran shows that we do. We have Pete Mecca that does a veteran story. That was yesterday, and he does it every Wednesday. And then I do this show on every Thursday, and we talk to veterans up and down the gambit. And I want to thank the folks that have sent us money to keep us going and keep us talking about veterans. And it's very important to us that, and we do a show on veterans from Desert Shield, Desert Storm on Mondays, because it's amazing the number of folks that have already forgotten about Desert Shield and Desert Storm. And we want to keep every veteran in front of everybody because of the importance of what they've done and their love for their country. When you got home, Ron, or before you got home, and as you think back over it now, did you have any thoughts about how can one human treat another human like that?
No, I don't think so. I don't know. To be honest with you, David, I may have been a little naive as far as a lot of things going on in the world and even in my situation. And then again, I have a strong background, faith background. My father was a very, very strong Christian, and I think even though I didn't spend a lot of time praying and stuff like that, I think just my background kind of gave me a easy feeling about things, so that I didn't really think about people mistreating other people. When I got shot down, not once did I ever feel like I would not survive and not come home. It was just kind of a inner peace I had about myself, and maybe a trust, or like I say, being naive about other people. I don't know. I just didn't feel like other people would do things. So I don't know. Maybe that was kind of stupid. I don't know.
No. I think basically what you just said, and if I'm putting words in your mouth, clarify it. But you never gave up hope.
No, never did. And I consider myself a pessimistic optimist. I never once did I think that I wasn't coming home. I just was kind of pessimistic about when it was going to happen.
and when you came home, what was your feeling?
Joy. I tell you what, I don't know. The minute we got on that 141 flying out of Hanoi, I kind of left all that behind me. I came home, and it was great to see my family. It was great to see my friends. I just picked up where I'd left off before I ever went over there. So I don't know. I like I say, I'm kind of an easygoing person, and I didn't dwell a whole lot on what had happened to me.
That's fantastic, and your attitude is incredible. And and do you feel like it's therapeutical to talk about it?
Well, it's never bothered me to talk about it. I've been pretty free with my time as far as when people ask me to talk about it. And again, this is just kind of human nature. I think we all remember the good things of our past, and we kind of put aside the things that were unpleasant or caused us any sort of concern in the past. And so that's kind of what I've done. I just and when I tell my story, a lot of people say, "Gosh, I never could have done that." Well, I think everybody could have done it in their own way. Everybody has a different way of putting up with things like that. I just was able to, again, like I say, easygoing, faithful, strong faith and stuff like that, and I was just able to kind of put it aside.
So when you came back, you flew for Eastern Airlines, and then flew for FedEx. Are you still flying general aviation at all, or?
No. Once I retired, I haven't been back up in an airplane since, except commercial. Yeah, it's kind of a long story. My road after I got home, I immediately stayed on active duty. Went back down to Randolph Air Force Base in San Antonio, where they they had an homecoming squadron where we would go and you would retrain to keep flying, keep your career going in the Air Force. I started that, and a couple months later, a buddy of mine who was flying for Eastern said, "Hey, Eastern's going to hire any ex-POW that can pass a physical." So I got out. I got out and went to Eastern Airlines. 5 months later, a fuel crunch of 1974 hit, and I was furloughed by Eastern Airlines. So I went back to Kansas City where my wife and son were living, and went to work for Butler Manufacturing Company, which they build farm buildings, grain bins, grain dryers, stuff like that. And I worked for them for a year or so, and then I went back on active duty in January of '76, and went back down to Randolph and finished up my Operation Homecoming. And then I was an instructor pilot in a T-37 out at Mather Air Force Base in Sacramento for about a little over a year. And then I came back down to Randolph to Air Training Command staff position. And then I got out again and went back to Eastern in 1980, and went back to Eastern and worked with Eastern until 89 or 88, and then when the strike occurred at Eastern, when the IAM went on strike and the pilots supported that, I went back. Let's see, what did I do then? This is a long story. I finally, when I was back on active duty, I was flying in the Guard as well, and so I flew in the Guard in Montgomery, Alabama, and I was flew there until I retired from the Guard in '89, and then I went on to FedEx in 1990, and flew with FedEx for I had 18 good years at FedEx before I retired.
Wow. And now your occupation is golf, I believe you said.
Yeah, my occupation is playing golf once a week, very poorly. I sing in the church choir, although we haven't since March, although we did have our first social distancing practice last Sunday for our Christmas program coming up. That's about it.
The one point that you missed in telling what you had done is, did you ever get survival school?
No, never did. No, I guess I didn't need it after I survived Vietnam. So
that's right.
Never went back.
You could have taught it.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
Well, maybe Eastern and FedEx needed a survival instructor. I don't know. But anyway, it is. It's a great story, and for all of us, want to thank you for your service. And you were married when you were a POW, right?
I was. I got married right after graduation, and just before, actually a couple months before I went on active duty. And then my son was born in September of 1965. Of course, I went to Southeast Asia in October of '66. So he was 1 year old when I left. He was 7 when I came back. And my wife and I separated, within a year, and later divorced. And then when I was working for Butler, I remarried and been married to Dawn, my present wife, now for 43 years, and we have 2 daughters. So I have one son from my first marriage and 2 daughters from my second marriage.
And do you feel like your coming back was we always try, or I always try to mention the families in that they sacrifice. Sometimes the sacrifice of the family is as much as the sacrifice of the officer or the enlisted personnel that has been deployed. And none of us really know until you've been there, done that, exactly what the circumstances are. And I look at our electronics today. I think about my father that served in World War II, and my mother kept his letters and he kept my mother's letters, and it's like so long between hearing anything. and yet our electronics today provide such a blessing to those that are serving to be able to even see their kids or see their mother or father or wife or husband or whatever. And, it's such a strain on the families. And even with our electronics, it's still a strain on the families when somebody's deployed.
Well, it is. And like I said earlier, in the 6 years I was over there, I received half a dozen packages from home, maybe a half a dozen letters, and I was able to write maybe 7 or 8 times, and that's it for 6 years. I personally feel like that whole ordeal was tougher on the families than it was on the POWs. Physically, yeah, we had some very, very tough times, but all the time we did not have to worry about our families. We knew that our families were being taken care of. Whereas our families, whereas our families for, like I said, for 3 years, mine didn't even know if I was dead or alive. And then after that, they still didn't know, what kind of treatment I was having. So they could worry every day about my well-being, whereas I didn't have to worry about them. So yeah, I think it was tougher on them actually than it was on us.
When you came back and going back to your small town and all, but what did you hit when you hit the first U.S. Air Base?
Well, the first one was, we flew to Clark, and we spent like 2 or 3 days at Clark. They gave us medical tests and all sorts of things and psychiatric testing, and the first ones that were there on the 12th of February, the hospital dietitians had been told that these people cannot have any sort of spicy food, and it has to be very bland because they haven't been used to eating the food that they're accustomed to as an Americans. So the staff was looking forward to giving people some very bland meals. Well, within 24 hours, I think they had eaten them out of all their ice cream, their steaks, their eggs, everything they had. And they finally realized these people can eat anything they want to. So Clark was the first one. Then from Clark, we made a brief stop at Hickam in Honolulu, where I got to see a couple. Well, one other thing at Clark. This is going back to Beloit, Kansas. When we flew into Clark, the day that we were released, we went to the hospital, and if anybody wanted to visit you in the hospital, they had to go through the hospital commander and get your approval. So one day I got a note from the hospital commander, was a letter from an Air Force sergeant who said that his wife would like to come visit me, and by the way, her name is, and he gave me her maiden name and everything. Well, it happened to be my high school girlfriend, whose husband was in the Air Force station at Clark. So the first person I saw at a U.S. Air Base that I knew was my old girlfriend from high school.
Wow.
Then when we got to Clark, a couple of my old squadron mates from Alcatraz, England, were there. This was in the middle of the night when we passed through Clark, and just for a couple hours, I got to see them. And then we got to Kelly Air Force Base, where they took us off the 141, that's in San Antonio, and put us on C-9s, and I flew to St. Louis, and that's where I actually met my wife. So, and my family. Then the next day, my family and my son got to see me the next day after we got to St. Louis.
Everything or a lot of what we've talked about today and what you've said is, what are the chances?
Well,
seeing people that you'd known. I have a common experience with this. Was my platoon sergeant in AIT. He and I had graduated from high school together. But it's such a big Army, such a big Air Force, and the number of stories that you told about running into people. What are the chances?
Yeah, it really a small world. I had another friend who was a fraternity brother of mine at the University of Kansas that he was on a trip up to Alaska. This was a couple years ago, and he got to talking to one of the ladies, and she was from Beloit, Kansas, and of course he was from Augusta, Kansas. But they both knew me, so it's a small world. You never know when you're going to run into somebody that you know.
Or your reputation that followed you.
Well, yeah, true.
But anyway, no, I think your story is fantastic, and I'm glad that we've had the opportunity to visit with you, and I hope that if you're in the Atlanta area sometime, that you'll come over to the studios and we can chat some more.
Okay, well, I don't live in Atlanta. I'm way up north at Woodstock. That's 30 miles away.
all of, But, well, once in a while we'll let folks from Woodstock in, and no, it would be nice, and I've got, I don't know about you, but I've got some of the guys that are training our young folks now, even from junior high school on through high school, that the junior ROTC, and he promised that one of these days I don't know about you, but you put a color guard in front of me, and I just, the hairs on my arms still stand up, And,
well, yeah, I agree with that. And my daughter and I, up until this year, ran Peachtree in about 23, 24 years in a row.
Wow.
And I tell you what, standing there before the race starts and having the either F-16s or F-18s come screaming down Peachtree right at you, and then plugging that burner in and climbing, man, I get tears in my eyes. It just and this huge flag they have at the start line at the Peachtree, yeah, I get the hair on my arm stands up, my heart starts beating, and I get tears in my eyes. It really gets to me.
Well, there's, and I say this too often, and I get criticized for it, but we've been a part of the largest fraternity and sorority in the world, and that's the U.S. military.
Yes.
And I think if people don't understand what a great and wonderful country we live in, we were born in, or we came and became citizens, this is the only place in the world that is like it, and the best place in the world. And I have flags all around me in my studio, and respect the flag, and I respect anybody that has raised their right hand and taken the oath. And
my heart goes out to everyone who's ever put on the uniform and represented our country, whether it not be in an actual war, battle, whatever. But if they put on the uniform and spent time doing their duty to protect our freedoms, I really respect them, and my heart goes out to them.
Well, it's everybody has to decide, and hopefully we've got some questions coming up in the near future, and we have to have a strong military. We just have to. When my son was stationed in Hawaii, I think something that brought tears to my eyes was the fact that here we are, the greatest country in the world, and they had planes on the tarmac that weren't flying because they were being cannibalized to keep a few planes flying.
Yeah. And
talking about breaking your heart, I thought, that's crazy. That's just, and this was about 7 years ago, and it was just terrible.
Yep, I agree, David.
So anyway, I want to thank you again for coming on, and I just about forgot the question that I told you that I always ask, and the hardest question that you have to answer. Do you know any veteran that can tell one story?
Well, no, they can tell one, but they've all got hundreds of them.
Exactly. And if you're what happens if you're at a table at JC or whatever, and there are 5 or 6 veterans there, I start one story, then somebody ups me, then somebody ups him, then somebody ups her, and all of a sudden it's back to me, and I've got to tell a better story than they did.
That's the way it goes.
But that's the beauty of, and I've also said, and I think I told you this, I haven't interviewed one veteran, be it man or woman, and we have a situation right now where one of our hosts was called back up, but I haven't interviewed one veteran that if our president called, that they wouldn't be breaking their neck to get out the door to say yes.
Yep, I agree with that too.
And we have the most wonderful, most beautiful military in the world, and I just wish everybody, and particularly some of the folks today, could appreciate and love our country like our military does and our veterans do. And it would be a much better place. But that's enough of me giving my opinion. So anyway, I do want to thank you again for coming on, and will you come back? That's the other important question.
Well, sure. I can probably come up with some more stories sometime.
Well, start thinking about it, and then maybe we can twist your arm in. With all of your experience at different places, do you keep in touch with anybody that graduated from Reese with you?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, one of my best friends, I just talked to him yesterday because he's in the hospital out in Denver. He broke his hip. But he's a retired United pilot. I flew with him at Reese. He flew F-4s. I saw him. He was flying out of Cameron Bay, and I saw him on my way back from Jungle Survival. He's the one that got me to fly at Eastern Airlines. Then we flew in the Alabama Guard together, and now we've kept real close. And I have a couple other friends from Reese also that I keep in touch with. Yes.
Well, let's make a deal. How about one of these days in the near future, you come in all the way from Woodstock into Sandy Springs, and I'll try to have a survival expert here just in case you need it. But you come in, and let's call up a couple of those that trained at Reese.
Okay, David, we can probably do that.
I think that would be fun, and we'd all sort of have something in common. And like I said, the biggest thing I have in common was watching that B-52 making an emergency landing at Reese. That flew right over my head.
Yeah, I didn't hear about that one.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I mean, you told me, but yeah. I didn't know. Hadn't heard about it before.
Like I said, that would have been in 1960. About 1967 or 68, something like that.
Yeah, well, I probably wasn't around.
No,
That's like I get emails every once in a while. Well, actually, on Facebook it says, what were you doing when, do you remember watching the man step on the moon? And I reply, no TV available.
Oh, yeah. Well, that, and I remember you were talking about when you started at Reese was when President Kennedy was assassinated.
Right.
And do you remember the station KLBK?
I do. I didn't have a whole lot of time to listen to the radio, but yeah, I remember it. I sure do.
Well, that's where I was. So
yeah.
Anyway, with that being said, we got to let you go. And
okay.
Colonel Mastin, right? Mastin?
Right.
Thank you so much for being on, and we're looking forward already to having you back. Take care.
Okay, David. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
If you live to serve and want to make an even bigger difference, consider joining the U.S. Army.